Hello and welcome to Catholic in America. Today we're talking about dualism and Gnosticism.
We'll be talking about what is dualism, what is Gnosticism, where these are manifesting in our culture, and why it's so attractive.
So stick around if you want to see us yin and yang our way out of this.
Thanks, guys, for joining us here on Catholic in America. Today I'm joined by Father Michael Nixon and Father Tom Dillon, and my name is Father Doug Martin. And so we're talking this morning about dualism and Gnosticism. And so when we use these words, I mean, what do they mean? I mean, what is dualism?
You want to take Gnosticism? We'll take dualism.
Yeah.
So dualism is basically that all of creation or reality has two sides. You know, yin and yang, the dark side and the light side of the force. This good creator God and this evil demon God.
Positive energy, negative energy. Destructive, creative.
Mm-hmm. So there's religious manifestations of this. There's kind of philosophical manifestations of it as well. There's kind of we call New Age movements that really play into this. And so it's something that I feel is pretty common in a lot of worldviews. And as Christians, we'd have a very different way of viewing reality and viewing the world. That would be attractive to that dualistic kind of concept. Now, Gnosticism, I mean, there's a lot we say about Gnosticism.
Oh, dear God.
But
Gnosticism, which
oftentimes
talk
about mud and putty. I mean, that's
Gnosticism. I mean, that's a very broad term for a wide variety of philosophies. But usually, and that's the thing, is I sort of like talking about Protestantism and talk about all Protestants in one group, which it doesn't really work.
We're not saying Gnostics are Protestants.
No.
But it's the same thing.
Some may be.
It's not dissimilar though than talking about like Hindus and like talking about Hindus and talking about Hindus as if they're one religion with one cultic practices and things like that. It's really a scattering of lots of different ideas. The same thing is true with Gnosticism historically as well as what it is in the world today. But simply put, like if you were to categorize Gnosticism, it's the idea, oftentimes it comes from a dualistic philosophy, which is that there's a good God and a bad God, or a good being and bad being. But very simply that there is a secret. There's secret knowledge, there's a secret code, sort of like the Illuminati. Right. The Illuminati actually has a lot of Gnostic underpinnings. But there's the secret code, secret, that if you can unlock the secrets of the universe, specifically through knowledge, so knowledge becomes the key point by how you unlock the secrets of the universe. You can see the secrets of the universe, and you can actually possibly even ascend to a higher state of being through knowledge and through knowledge alone. One clear example, most recently, that most people would be familiar with, which is very Gnostic, is the movie The Matrix.
Yeah.
Like this idea that there's a real reality, then there's a fake reality. And that there's good people, there's bad people, and that knowledge becomes the ultimate source to acquiring power.
Right.
You take the red pill, you get the secret knowledge, and all of a sudden you see how far down the rabbit hole this is.
Correct.
That's right. Yeah. So to go down that rabbit hole, where's Star Wars and all of this?
That's totally Gnostic. Totally Gnostic and it's also dualist.
You got a little bit of both of them in there, and so it's that kind of popularity of movies like that, and you even kind of see it in the Marvel universe. I mean, you see this all over the place, cinematically and literature. You see it really in common everyday society. So why is it becoming so popular? Why is it so attractive? Why is it so sexy these days to fall into this kind of idea, specifically in Eastern religion and Eastern thought, but even just in general?
I think that it's attractive to have an explanation for everything, like a lens. We're in such uncertain times. There's a breakdown of the family, breakdown of society, cultural
truth,
and so to have something that kind of allows people to feel, okay, I can view everything through this lens. And you see this when people discover, whether it's Marxism, or they discover vegetarianism, or the CrossFit, or whatever it is. Like, I can view everything through this lens.
Did you do CrossFit?
I did. I was part of the cult for a little while. I'm a dropout now. But
jogging's even in that too. Running.
So there's a certain attraction to I want to make sense of things, and this allows me to, in broad strokes, to make sense of the world, maybe even of my own situation. Sometimes, especially when it's a painful situation, it helps to have something that can help make sense of it.
Well, and I think that actually in deference to the movement, I don't agree with it, obviously, as a Christian and as a Catholic priest, but in deference, I think that I would add two things. One, people are craving, as you're saying, they're craving spiritual answers to the invisible things that they're noticing.
Meaning.
Right? So there's a great search for meaning, and that there's a search for meaning which makes sense of my existence as well as existence around me, which is seemingly can at times seem to be chaotic. So like there's this sense of trying to make sense of this. So people are gravitating towards those areas of the world and those philosophies where they provide you with a schema of making sense of reality. And especially when you're looking at dualism, there's kind of also this, like in dualism, and especially as dualism manifests itself in particular religions, right? Because dualism is kind of an overarching philosophical outlook on life, but it manifests in, okay, how do I observe the external world, right? How do I observe things over here? And how do I make sense of the external world? And so there's also, like in this, there's the recognition, even within dualism, that they're observing real patterns.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing. It's like there does seem to be a pattern between creation and destruction. So they're observing natural patterns that exist in the universe and within society and within social norms and within human beings. So they see these patterns, and like the pattern between creation and destruction, between positive and negative, and you can see these things also reflected in physics. So there's a recognition of something which is real in front of me, but then they oftentimes that they will then use this to describe all of reality.
Yeah.
Right. So, but there's also this thirst. But then there's also, like within dualism, it arises on kind of an anthropological. So, like, what is humanity? What am I? And also, what am I in relation to the opposite sex?
Yeah.
Right. Because actually, a lot of pagan religions have a lot of dualistic tendencies. Like, especially like where you'll find dualism encapsulated in a modern day world religion is in Wiccan.
Yeah.
Like Wiccanism, which is kind of this parallelism between femininity, which is worship, and then also how it combines with masculinity between the moon goddess and the horn god in this kind of their Wiccan ideology. But behind the Wiccan ideology is oftentimes this dualistic understanding of male energies and female energies as they're both necessary and they're combined. So sometimes you have in dualism, you'll have this idea of these male and female energies, and which is ultimately reflected in some Hindu sects and some Hindu cults, where there is actually coexistence between these two energies. But then you can also have other dualistic philosophies where there's extreme opposition and animosity between the two, which is oftentimes like in the Star Wars stuff, you have more of like this opposition between the light side of the Force and the dark side of the Force, and this recognition that this constant tension, that there's not really harmony between the two, but that one can't exist without the other. And as more you try to get rid of evil, the more you actually create it. And the more you try to get rid of the good, the more that actually you create it. And so like this kind of this yin and yang ideology, which is found. But I also think this is like one of the reasons why it's popularized, is going also into the Gnostic stuff, is because it's a combination of things that people are oftentimes unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
But people therefore kind of use these things that they're generally aware of, and then they kind of make it their own.
Well, and it's a different form of tradition as well. I mean, with this, today we're rejecting the kind of tradition that we know of patriarchy. I mean, all those kinds of things that are particularly Christian. That has really been a part of our society. Judeo-Christian has been a part of our society since the founding really of our country, and even going back further than that. I think you start to see this. What else is there? Let's look for something else. Let's find something else.
Yeah.
And so you start to look at, well, what else was ancient? What else was back there? What else did the church suppress and try to destroy? What cultures did the church suppress and destroy? What secret knowledges and what different perspectives on reality have we not had access to? Right. Which then gets into the Gnostic stuff. Is like this idea is that there's this class of people who are suppressing the real knowledge of what really is going on. Yeah. And now this has become like kind of the dialogue is that the Catholic Church now kind of stands as this oppressive force, which is oppressing the actual distribution of knowledge and of truth, which is I forget the name of the author, but the Golden Compass series.
Philip Pullman.
Yeah, Philip Pullman, and his whole thing is like, which is has some Gnostic tendencies. Is that like
the Dan Brown stuff definitely as
well?
Yeah,
so like the church is this ancient organization which is suppressing all knowledge, and so like the church in many people's minds have even become this thing of anti-reason. Despite the historical fact that like the church was promoting reason and science.
What's interesting to me as a society is we've kind of society's kind of like kind of, post a lot of these things, even like post-dualism. So a great example of this is Robert Jordan wrote the Wheel of Time series, which I'm a fan of the books, at least, of the Wheel of Time. Haven't finished them. There's a lot.
I did, actually.
There's a lot. I finished all, and that's very much based on dualism. It's very much based on men and women, and kind of, women can wield this power of magic, and when men wield it, it corrupts it. So kind of this and trying to bring those two things together and the struggle towards that. But it's fascinating to me in the television show that just came out last year. The first thing they did is they got rid of that dualism. They basically said like men and women can both do this thing, and it doesn't really matter. Like so.
Well, they did still wield. They still put some of the symbols in it, but it was not the real dualism which was
absolutely.
present.
So in a sense, there was like a desire to. What this has led to, this dualism, a dualistic kind of almost Hindu philosophy that animated a lot of Robert Jordan's work. In a modern manifestation with modern writers, they're like, well, we can't have this men and women are different. We just have to have women are better, but men and women can both do what men and women both do. Yeah. So it's an interesting kind of place where this has led as a society. Not to say that that's the writers of the Wheel of Time series on television are the epitome of our culture and society or thinkers, but maybe they are. But I just find that interesting, kind of like where that has led us as a society. That doesn't really answer your question.
Well, that's somewhat. But so where do we commonly find these things? I mean, we're talking about books and some of these things, but where do you commonly find these? Like in
media, media, television, anything which is telling a story. Anything which is telling a story today is where you're going to find all this, because it's offering an alternative. What a lot of the stories that are coming out, especially of Hollywood, as well as in the culture and literature, is trying to offer an alternative to the Christian mythos. So they're trying to, there's a movement in academia as well as within kind of the atheist and agnostic sectors of society, as well as obviously some of the pagan, that Christianity has dominated the mythic storytelling of what does it mean to be human, and now what does it mean to be part of a system and society, that we now need to kind of deconstruct the Christian ethos, and specifically the Christian mythos, which is what creates ideas for young children. So that's why all these storytelling, and specifically storytelling is the way in which values, and myth and values is kind of intertwined. So this idea of let's deconstruct, let's take away this and provide an alternative. And so that's why, but the question is, what's the alternative to the Christian mythos? Well, you can go back to the ancient world and you can find things that
pick and choose certain things.
But it's not. But here's the thing that I've seen within the culture, as well as especially the media representations of dualism. It's not actually ancient dualism, and it's not the actual dualism that's present in the Far East. Like they flirt with it. And especially in the Western manifestation of dualism, there's this flirting, this romanticization, but there's not a commitment to it.
Right.
Now, every once in a while, there is a new idea or new film or a new book that comes out of Hollywood where they do actually kind of marry the idea and take it to its logical conclusion, which I thought was interesting. With there was a movie, I wouldn't recommend it, but it was called Annihilation. With Natalie Portman, and in that they kind of actually gave a pretty good description of nihilism. As you kind of this meaninglessness and kind of this idea of Eastern taking it to its logical conclusion. It didn't do very well because a lot of people, either
it seemed weird.
It just seemed weird, and people understood it, and that's why high intellectuals were like, "Oh, this is amazing," but the vast majority of people are like, "What is this?" And that's why I'm saying, because when you place a lot of those philosophies into their actual story, people are like, ooh, I don't necessarily want to become a tree, or I don't want to become a crystal.
I think people don't realize how important the Judeo-Christian mythos of creation being created good by a good and loving God, us falling and being under the dominion of an enemy who's not God's rival, but is also a rebel against God.
Which specifically is dualism.
So I'm saying that's not dualism.
No, that there's an enemy who's equal to God.
So that's an important part. So we as Christians believe that God, there's someone who's against God, but he's not God's rival.
Right.
Just like a tiny group of 5-year-olds playing football might be like, the Atlanta Falcons are our rival, but they're not really rivals. They might hate the Atlanta Falcons. That's possible for whatever reason, but just kind of recognizing that. So the Christian mythos a good creation created by a good and loving God with a purpose and a plan, and creates us in His image and likeness. We're wounded and fallen by sin. We need to be liberated from that. That's eventually why our Savior comes. So that whole story is the backdrop for like a fundamental goodness of creation, where creation itself is not God, is one of the tensions, I think, in Christianity against other worldviews and religions that either had that all of creation is God, kind of a pantheism, or all of creation, all of the world is the creation of an evil God, this material world that we need to transcend it. So kind of recognizing that interplay and how different those two views are. The Lord of the Rings probably being the great example of a Christian mythos in a fantasy novel, which brings out angels and brings out higher beings and brings out the value of suffering, brings out this self-gift, all these sorts of things that I think are really beautiful,
but also answers,
and stirring.
What Tolkien did in Lord of the Rings, very clearly influenced by his Christian faith. Now, there's also a lot of pagan influences, because Tolkien was, again, expert in kind of especially Norse and Saxon mythology, his writing. I mean, he was a linguist. But part of also what Lord of the Rings does, which kind of really encapsulates the Christian mythos, is on the way in which evil and goodness are presented. Good and evil. And in Lord of the Rings, good and evil are not in equal balance. There's not two opposing things. It's that everything which is evil is the corruption of something which was originally good. Even Melkor or Morgoth, which from the Silmarillion, which is referenced every once in a while in Lord of the Rings, like even that, he is a former Valar. He's a former one of these high archangels that ultimately rebelled. And everything else, in the orcs are corruptions of elves. You have that there are men who have been corrupted from their original, versus you have the valorous men, you have corrupted men. But ultimately, always within Lord of the Rings, you have this idea that evil is not equal to the good, and that's why ultimately it seems like it's going to win, but ultimately it becomes crushed. Which is the image of St. Michael the Archangel. But like you'll find in a lot of these, in a lot of the new renditions of how good and evil is being portrayed in storytelling, whether it be literature or more popularly in film, you're going to find that good and evil are oftentimes in this balance where you can't have one without the other. And that's the very definition of dualism. Is that you can't have goodness without evil, you can't have, and that's where you get into certain forms of dualism where they say, well, there actually is no good and evil. Good and evil are just the words you put on for creative energies and destructive energies.
The new Star Wars basically says that specifically, where they're now trying to say, like, well, the Jedi are a mistake because they were always trying to stamp out the bad. So in a sense, to kind of like, get rid of these good shining examples, the things that work for the good side or the light side of the Force, to try to to destroy those completely. So it is fascinating, just as a culture, where it takes us.
Good. So we're going to go to break on that. Please come back in just a moment.
Whatever the original intent for social media was, it probably wasn't this.
Well, I'm sure you've seen this viral video.
M to the B.
Gaming Week Day 3.
This egg is the most liked Instagram picture.
Hi. Impressive carrying skills, right?
Okay, so tell me all about this.
Yikes. See what I mean? However, at St. Dominic Media, we found a much better way to do social.
It is a joy, a pleasure to want to spend time with the Lord and with one another.
If you delight in the Lord, He would give you the desires of your heart. And so I prayed Him to send me to the right church. And so He led me to the one that He established, which is the Catholic Church.
So I'm sitting in my quiet space, my time with God, praying for my grandchildren.
Understand that the devil isn't only the enemy of our souls, he's the enemy of our human nature. And so what God has joined, he wants to rupture.
Judeo-Christian values.
You corrected it. Judeo-Christian values. Your brain corrected it. Oh, that's fantastic. Every year, we produce hundreds of dynamic, faithful Catholic videos that reach millions of people, both online and on television. At St. Dominic Media, we're doing the heavy lifting of creating good, quality Catholic content, and we'd love for you to partner with us, either by visiting stdominicmedia.com and following the share link, or by using the offertory envelopes offered by your parish from OSV. Help us sow seeds far and wide as we use new media's potential for good. Together, let us invest in and grow the kingdom.
All right, welcome back to Catholic in America. This topic, we're talking about dualism and Gnosticism.
And make sure you please like, share, and subscribe. It would be great.
So we were talking about before the break how it's, this search in our society. Specifically, we see it in America. At least that's where I experience it the most. I mean, I'm not really sure what's going on everywhere else necessarily, but in America.
We're Americans, after all. We don't know what's going on.
We don't have to, do we? Yeah, we don't. I guess I should say we're from the United States, not just Americans. But so this idea that there is this kind of rejection of patriarchy. There's this rejection, really, of the Christian ideals and Christianity itself, and this search for something more, something else, and how we, there's this trying to go back to other things, trying to go back to dualism, Gnosticism, those things that may have been repressed by the Catholic Church, whether for good reason or not, but then also going to places we don't know, things we don't know, like Eastern thought. And trying to bring that in. And we were talking about how there really isn't this complete sellout to it, that you just kind of want to dabble in it but not bring it all along. And there's an interesting book written by Tom Holland, who is
not Spider-Man.
He's a historian, not Spider-Man. He's a historian called Dominic. And kind of the theme of the book is that Western civilization itself, really the entire world to a certain extent, but Western civilization itself is built on the ethos and the mythos of Christianity, and that it is unable to entangle itself and divorce itself completely from that thought just simply because of the way it is. One of the things he mentions in there is loving your neighbor, doing good to someone who's done evil to you, are all Christian concepts. Before Christianity, it wasn't, nowhere else would that have been the case. And if you go to somewhere where Christianity's not, you don't see that.
Well, and I think it's also interesting that if my understanding is correct, Tom Holland is, I believe, atheist agnostic. He's not. This is not a Christian who's spouting Christian rhetoric.
He does not have a reason to say these things.
It's a rational, probably rational humanist looking at this and saying that, okay, the foundations are the foundations for what they are. You can disagree with the foundations or not, but when you try to blend two foundations of philosophical thought upon which culture is built, that you can try to merge them, you can try to make them the same, but there's a certain incompatibility.
Yeah.
Which is why now you're having kind of this now, I mean, don't want to open up another can of worms, but now you have this kind of this pluralistic mentality, which the pluralistic mentality is very different than the dualistic or the monotheistic or monist, but still, you still have
another show.
Yeah, the different show, but still you have this, there is an incompatibility because even the way in which you view human beings, because that's part of also dualism, is like, how do I view my human nature? And how do I view my relationship to the opposite sex, which is a major component within dualism, is how do I view human nature? My dark side, my light side, which kind of brings me back to flashbacks from like Ocarina of Time and Link and Zelda and all of my video games, like the dark side, the dark, because I mean, there's an appeal to that, because we do, like I said earlier, there's this recognition that there is a pattern that I'm observing. The question is my observation correct? But there's this still is like, how do I understand this? Because when you look at things like that, like the way that you in like India, for instance, can make sense of reality, is that like, well, the reason why these things exist is because you did something bad in a bad life, and now your yin and yang, your dharma and karma level has now pushed you back into the universe, and like you now got what you deserved, which was the beginning of the caste system.
So I think that's a good point too, to just sort of recognize that as a society, maybe we want some of the attractive, flashy elements of dualism or Gnosticism, but no one really wants a society that's based on that. You know, even kind of like a Gnosticism of you can make a maybe a little bit of a stretch, a Gnosticism of like a kind of a Marxist society,
right?
Which, you know, once you get this or the dualistic society, you got the proletariat, and you've got, you know, the oppressive ruling class. Like once you see a society what that looks like, it's horrifying.
Yeah.
And so we want the Christian aspects, what Tom Holland speaks of, the dignity of every human person by nature of their creation, which is a Judeo-Christian principle. It's not found anywhere else. It's something you earn,
and the reason
deserve.
Why human beings have dignity is because we're made in the image and likeness of God.
So in a sense, you want to get
That's
rid of
what makes sense.
You want to get rid of the whole God part, and you just want to say, like, every person has dignity and every person should have freedom and all these things, which we would say yes, but then they want to take that in a direction apart from the foundations, but it's trying to,
and when you do, then you say, well, no, maybe they don't now. Yeah.
So you have, you're kind of sawing the branch off that you're sitting on there, where you have no foundation, no foundation for an anthropology of knowing who we are. And if you have a Gnostic anthropology, that basically means you have worth and dignity as long as you discover this secret knowledge. Outside of that, you're part of the darkness. You're part of the.
And just to go into a little bit more into the Gnosticism, which we haven't touched on too much, but still, one of the major like key pieces of Gnosticism is this notion that wisdom, logia, so wisdom is the real reality, right? And that the material reality is bad, right? So that
this is Yoda.
Yeah,
we are not this crude matter. Luminous beings we are. Heretic, right?
It's a Gnostic heresy. But I'm saying, but this notion of this superiority of the spirit, right? That it's the spirit, it's the spirit. But that when they say spirit, they also mean knowledge,
right?
Knowledge, wisdom. And these things are what make us immortal. This is what makes us. So it's this elevation.
The immaterial side of things.
It's the immaterial, which is the best. But immaterial means knowledge,
right?
Not love,
right?
It means knowledge, and that what is evil in Gnosticism is that matter, the physical body, and that's actually the ancient Gnostics. That was one of the key things that identified a Gnostic is that they believed that the body was bad, the material realm was evil,
which is why John went after him so bad.
The material realm was the source of suffering, is the source of evil. The reason why I suffer is because I'm trapped in this material body. Materialism and material is bad. It's something which is abhorrent, and it's meant to either be indulged in because I can't help it, or I get rid of it and I practice severe asceticism, even to like killing myself.
Which is a Gnostic,
which is this notion of that I can free myself from the prison, the shackle of my body, if I can only exit out and become this pure spiritual mental being. Right. And therefore people who actually, that's why like people who try astral projection, to try to free themselves from the shackle of their body so they're no longer bound to it. But that's the whole thing is like from a Christian ethos, like, no, the body is good because we also experience love in the body.
Right.
Like the way in which we experience divinity is through love, not through predominantly wisdom, but through love. Wisdom's a part of that. But still, it's also where now you're seeing manifestations of this weird types of Gnosticism where people create a complete division and separation between the body and the spirit, which is that now...
Or the body and the mind.
Body and the mind, or my interior self, right? And so this is also why where you find in some of the trans movement today is this Gnostic understanding of people who are legitimizing and rationalizing and saying, no, the reason why is because the interior self, my interior being is separate and distinct from my exterior body. Right? And so there is this, not all people experience that, we'll say that, but there is that growing movement in some of the circles is that
that's how it's explained, at least. Even if that's how it's
correct. And that is a Gnostic approach, which ultimately you can see the dualism, like the dualism, which is that the body is bad, the interior self, my feelings are good, right? Therefore, like this is what is good and this is what is bad, and therefore this becomes discardable. And what really is important is my interior feelings, my interior self.
And the body becomes like just something that's only good in as much as you can manipulate it to match up to your mind. So the mind is reality, and so the body is this thing that needs to be surgically altered, needs to be a staple cat ears on top of it, like whatever the sort of thing. Again, not to talk bad about people who maybe struggle in these areas, but to say that there's a philosophy behind that is a Gnostic philosophy that says that you are not your body. Christianity comes against that. And in the context when Christianity rose on the scene that Tom Holland speaks of, the reason why Christianity was so different is because it believes in the intrinsic goodness of the body and of creation, that creation's not God, but it's created by a good and loving God. We are not God, but we're made for union for God. This whole sort of like kind of tension with this reality. So the created reality is supposed to unfold to something even beyond itself, and has an infinite dignity and worth too. So there's something really distinct between the Christian understanding of the human person and the Gnostic and dualist understanding of the human person. And I think when we lose that, when we lose the Christian genius, we lose the person too. In a sense, we become we're under these evil forces that are at work in us that will dominate and destroy us, or even within our own bodies. Our body becomes like a war zone rather than a place of redemption, which is always what the gospel invites us into.
Right. And that's exactly what like Christianity offers. Is it offers as strange as the Trinity sounds, right, on the surface level, and I mean, that's the hardest thing in our faith to talk about, but if you look at the Trinity philosophically, like this notion of 3 in 1 and 1 in 3, like the Christian understanding of the Trinity solves the problem of what philosophically is called the one and the many.
Right.
Like how does oneness coexist with multiplicity? Right? And as opposed to answering the question of multiplicity, multiple beings, and how do we have multiple realities and things like that within one, which is that no, there's two sides of the same, which is dualism. That no, like the Christian understanding is that everything is made in the image and likeness of God, which brings a synthesis and harmony that protects individuality, right? While at the same time maintaining unity and maintaining oneness. And so like this notion is like Christianity has something philosophically to offer to the table because it's only within the Christian understanding of God and also within our mythos that you'll find that actually this idea of individuality, the individual is good and groups are good.
Right.
Yeah.
And oneness is good. The universe is good and the individual who participates in it is good versus like you have in, don't want to jump onto pluralism, but you have this only the individual is good, right? Versus the group is non-meaningful. Or you have this like extreme monism, which is only the group is good, and then dualism, which tries to create this balance, but a balance which is found in conflict, versus like in the Christian one. No, we found in the Christian mythos, and that's why like understanding the Trinity is hard because understanding the Trinity is hard because understanding reality is hard,
right?
Which is a reflection of God Himself,
right? So, yeah. So as we go forward from this. What are some suggestions for this? Where are we with this? What as a Catholic, how do I respond to this?
Yeah, well, I think just getting a good sense of good, solid anthropology of who we are and whose we are, that you're not a cosmic accident, that you're made by a good and loving God with a purpose for your life, that your body is good, your mind is good, your soul is good, wounded by sin, we're affected and impacted by sin, but that we have a Savior and He saves us as human persons personally, but also in the context of a family. So we have a context that we come into that we can struggle through these questions, we can ask these questions with, and to recognize too that there's aspects of this that are very countercultural, and that's okay. It's okay when all of a sudden our Judeo-Christian principles, understanding of the human person begins to run against aspects of the culture. We should sort of expect that, not because we want to be antagonistic all the time, but there's something about that. We just had Respect Life Month. We had the pro-life chain, and we were standing out, basically praying and demonstrating in favor of pregnant women and of unborn babies. And some people were angry about that. But there's something about that is like there's a difference. If I'm upholding the dignity of every human person, that's going to at times run into conflict with other people. I'm still called to love them. But I think that's the first thing, is beginning to realize we've got a rich anthropology and philosophy here as Catholic Christians, and we should dive into it. John Paul II is a great source for that, but amongst many others.
I think just being more aware, like paying attention to not just like the vitriol that's flying through the culture now, but like what's the underlying principles, like what's the underlying things that are going on here? Because it's not just, like very few people are actually like crazy, like 100% crazy. Right. They, like even people who we disagree with, like they have a rationale, and that's why I understand the rationale. But also I'd say this one, understanding the trends and the patterns that are actually going on in society, but also I would say being aware of the seductive nature of some of these philosophies, because that's the thing is like I tell people, I remember like in grade school, people used to make fun of Hinduism growing up because they're like, oh, you believe in reincarnation. I'm like, be careful, that's actually more appealing once you understand it. Like I still disagree with it, but I'm not going to make fun of it.
Right.
Because if you make fun of it, then a person starts looking into it more deeply, and then they start realizing, oh, there's a lot. On the other hand, I think that having families and having, especially young parents, teach their children how to discern reality from a Christian perspective before they start introducing them to alternative theories.
Sure.
And that's why they need to be very rooted in their Judeo-Christian, because only then can they actually start making sense of all the competing theories. The problem is now is like a lot of children today that in the society we live in are not being firmly rooted in a Judeo-Christian outlook on life, so that when they then see these other things, they become enraptured by them.
Right. One other thing too that I think it's important to say, that as a tendency, because I see this from Christians, non-Christians, again, all the online, is to ascribe evil to other people. Like that is a very Gnostic and dualist kind of principle that we as Catholic Christians should fight against. To say that those people are evil.
Right.
Because that is, as soon as, because then when we see it used against us, we're like, oh, that hurts. But as soon as someone believes a certain political party, as soon as someone engages in a certain action that we disagree with, again, we see this from the right and the left of saying, which ones are good? How do I become a not evil person? Oh, it's by voting this way. It's by putting the right thing in my Twitter bio. It's by doing these things that now kind of validate me, and then I can see those other people as other. So that's a great thing for us to fight against as Christians. Say like, no, other people are created good by a good and loving God. And even the ones who do evil things, which is me at times, let's be honest, that even within that, there's still a desire, what I'm made for, and what I ultimately desire is God. So am I in need of conversion? Yes. And so was every single person, particularly the ones that I disagree with their actions or their beliefs. So that would be a great thing. And if you want a huge countercultural thing within Christianity, it's that the people I disagree with are not evil, they're actually good. And they're in need of conversion just like I am. And my goal is to help them to see their goodness and the potential and to see the truth and to maybe take a step towards that. So that's a major difference too that should animate us and far too often does not animate us as Christians and believers.
Where the rubber really does meet the road. Yeah. So thank you guys for this conversation. Thank you for joining us. If you would like to support us, please go to Patreon and support us. We appreciate all the support that we receive from you already. Your love, your prayers, and even the monetary gifts that you give to the ministry, to the work that we're trying to do here. And so if you believe in that, please like, share, and subscribe so that others can enjoy the same content that you are, and so that we can really spread the message of Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior and as the lover of their soul, dualistic or not, the lover of their soul. So please come back and join us again soon. God bless.